If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this. People, what are your creepy, scary Ouija board stories? My two friends and I tried a Ouija board about 15 years ago in front of a bunch of people. We tried to contact my deceased grandfather. It did not work. The pointer started to move and said it was my one friend's father, the one girl that was doing the board with us, who was deceased before any of us met her. She let go of the pointer, so it was just my friend and I manning the board. To verify, we asked his middle name. Got it. Asked his birthday. Got the month, day and year correct. To this day, when I see my one friend, I ask him how he knew all that information about the father. And to this day, he says he didn't know the information as he never met the deceased father and it wasn't staged. I know I didn't know that information. We asked what he, the father, wanted to say and he just spelled out love and then the infinity motion over and over. We called it quits when the girl started crying profusely and she threw the board away. A week later, I saw my grandfather's face in a dream. He was shaky from the stroke he had before he died, as he was in my last memories of him. I just looked at him. He slowly raised his head and we made eye contact. I said I tried to contact you. He stopped shaking, leveled his face, leaned forward and said, I know, we let the other guy go. Then I woke up. A few years ago, my friends, a group of girls, decided to try this out with a group of guys. We were in the 12th grade at the time. My group of girls had messed around with it before, to varying degrees of success. Well, this time, it was my hands on the planchette with my other girlfriend. This thing was moving crazy fast, faster than I had ever seen, and seemed to be getting quite agitated by the group of guys we were with who were joking around and not taking it seriously. It essentially told them to shut up and stop talking. I told the guys, seriously, please stop being rude, I'm kind of freaked out. Anyways, because I was getting nervous, one of the guys took over. He was a bit more serious about it. Almost immediately the thing spelled out, don't open the door. Well, we were all in the basement, and there was only one door, so we all kind of looked over at it nervously. Because I was getting anxious, I took the blanket and kind of hid my face. Immediately it spelled out, don't hide from me. Everyone was freaked out. The guy who had his hands on the planchette literally started to cry. He wanted to take his hands off, but we have this rule that you don't take your hands off until you get it to say goodbye. Everyone wanted to stop, but it took about 10 minutes of asking dumb questions until the thing finally slid to goodbye. Some of the guys speculated afterwards that it meant don't open the metaphorical door of the spiritual world. The reason being, is we told them to never ask for a sign or else it kind of lets the spirit roam free outside of the board. Before that guy took over, they kept asking for a sign, only for me to cut them off mid-sentence and tell them to knock it off. So this made some sense. I'm of the opinion that Ouija boards are a large threat if you use them incorrectly, so I personally haven't used it. However, in a class I took in college, called Anthropology of the Paranormal, my teacher, who will be called Sean, told us a lot about his experiences with the paranormal and how he and his team of ghost hunters helped a few people who had messed with Ouija boards. One person in particular always stuck out to me because this person lived relatively close to where I lived. I don't know the person's name, as Sean didn't give that out to us, but essentially what happened is that this person and a few friends decided to duck around with a Ouija board and see what would happen. Lo and behold, they ended up inviting a demon to live in their house and it took an exorcism to get it out. Note, Sean not only has a little ghost hunter type crew, but is also an exorcist's assistant. In the end, everything ended up working out okay, but it was still a very difficult and painful 4 years of this person's life taken up just because they decided to duck around with a Ouija board. On a trip back to the islands for my grandpa's funeral, a pregnant cousin of mine, my older brother and sister, and I decided to try to talk to our recently passed grandfather. Now everyone back in the islands are very superstitious, so there are no Ouija boards available there, so we had to make one out of cardboard and a magnifying glass. We wait till the night after the funeral and head down to the beach behind our grandma's house and start summoning the spirits. All of us never really believed in spirits, so we started off just ducking around and asking if Elvis or Michael Jackson could speak to us, but when we did finally ask for my grandpa, everything started feeling eerie as duck. The magnifying glass started to move and it moved to the letter S before my grandma came running down the hill yelling at us, "What have you done? What have you done?" and started hitting us. None of us really thought anything of it until the next night my cousin had a miscarriage. I'm not sure if it was just a coincidence or not, but I don't duck around with Ouija boards anymore. I went to my uncle's house since my extended family was in town. He goes to garage sales all the time and picked up a Ouija board. My mom used one when she was a teenager and told me she had a bad experience with one. She was with her friends and they were asking the Ouija board questions. One of her friend's babies died suddenly a few months prior to them playing with it. My mom, and a few of her friends asked her how the baby died. The planchette, I think it is called, started moving to the M, then the A, then back to the M, then to the A again, spelling out mama. They instantly freaked out, obviously. Little did they know that in popular Ouija lore, mama is actually a Ouija board demon. They kept asking it questions and it was getting vulgar. It was saying, "Duck him," when they asked about whether or not my mom and dad were going to get married. It was answering questions that it shouldn't know. After the experience, my mom and her friends were scared and crying, and they buried it. Fast forward about 22 years and here I am. We are at my uncle's house and he pulls the board out. My mom was nervous, as was I. As nervous as I was also curious. We decided to play with it. It was just my mom and I with other family members around. We asked it random questions and then started asking questions that neither my mom or I knew but others in the room did. It was answering the questions correctly. I was nervous as hell but wanted to talk to it more. I asked what my future career was going to be and it said Walmart. I never spell it with 2 L's and neither does my mom. I work there. I asked it what my Aunt Pam's favorite band was. It started spelling out duck, and that is when I let go of the planchette. I was scared. At that point I knew I wasn't talking to a good entity. I asked it who it was. It spelled out Leviathan. I was pretty nervous and was about to tell my mom we should be done and tell it goodbye, but I just wanted to know what it wanted. I was stupid and asked it. I said, "What do you want?" It replied with, "Tree fitty." I was scared to death and threw it into a fire. It was a horrible experience and I do not recommend ever playing with one. Especially since Leviathan is a prehistoric dinosaur-type Loch Ness monster. It was seriously the scariest thing that has ever happened to me and prompted me to immediately do my research on the topic. I hope that I can encourage you not to play with these boards. It is a gateway to pure evil. Although it is made by a toy company, it basically opens a portal for hellish things. Demons and ghosts need consent in order to contact you. You are basically giving consent when you play with a board. As you can see, I live in Wyoming, with a lot of woods if you didn't know. Well, my brother and cousins knew of this haunted shed supposedly out in the middle of the woods. Told me stories of them seeing things and being chased out of it by dark figures. I wanted to see myself. Me and my brother went out there to the shed and walked in this small open shed and placed my Ouija board down and start going. I asked, "Is anyone willing to talk to me?" Immediately moved to yes. I asked, "What's your name? Where are you from? Are you or bad?" All questions were answered with yes or no. Then I asked, "Are you a demon?" And it spelt out behind you. Then right after that was said, loud pounding started coming from outside and we went to go look, and in the doorway was the black figure they told me about. Just standing there staring us down. We both booked it right by the figure and off we went. 2 days later, me, my brother and my cousins went this time, and the shed was gone. Just a big empty space. I've had 2 encounters with these strange black figures and they scare the shit out of me. What or could they be? It was a particularly cold winter night in the outhouse of my secluded cabin on the Guldhoppigan mountain. Remembering the particularly oleaginous elk steak and copious amounts of akvavit I had consumed the night before, I knew that I was in for quite a movement. Overtaken by gastrointestinal discomfort, I decided to break out my long-forgotten Ouija board in order to ease the pain and distract me from the inevitable excretion. It was October 9th of 1956 and the prohibition against the Jesuits had recently been lifted in our sovereign land. The recent turmoil amongst the sparse population of the Norwegian hillside in which I reside prompted my first question: will the recent parliamentary action spark the beginning of an impending havoc in my modest community? My hand, as if suddenly transformed into a red squirrel, jumped about in an erratic fashion before finally concluding its cavorting motion on no. Slightly irritated by this anticlimactic response and an excruciatingly painful episode of explosive regurgitation like defecation, I amplified my curiosity by inquiring the mystical board once again. What is it that you most loathe, my enigmatic friend? I dine on the blood of the dead and neither fear nor loathe any one or thing, including but not limited to the mighty Ragnarok. Slightly confused and quite perplexed by the now almost humanized section of lumber, I puzzled my mind for an equally elusive response. As I sat in the moonlight of my roofless ramshackle shithouse, I couldn't help but reflect on the hilarity of my situation. What a night I had lived already. It almost seemed as though the nocturnal events had ensued in such a nature that was forbidden by my understanding of reality. It was immediately after this realization that I rationalized the irrationality of the Ouija events in such a way that lead to one and only one conclusion. I must be dreaming. Bewildered by my recent understanding of the occurrence, I proceeded to violently vomit as I wallowed in the nostalgia of the seemingly impossible Ouija response. It was precisely following this mind-bogglingly profound expulsion of digested elk remains that I conjured up my next inquiry. What is your name and where are you from? I spouted out in a begrudging tone. They call me Neathawk and I reside perpetually in the roots of Yggdrasil, which lies in the depths of Niflheim. As my hand scattered about the cursed chunk of organic matter, I couldn't help but moan in disbelief at the punctuality at which the letters in question had made themselves apparent. Remembering the previous epiphany that I must be in the depths of slumber, I decided to test this supposed creature which called itself Neathawk. "Show yourself, you otherworldly abomination," I exclaimed. Immediately following my outburst, a gigantic squirrel-like figure burst from my anus in a fiery rage and proclaimed, "Eagle, you fool! Have you no reason? Tempt me further and I will show you my wrath the way that only Ragnarok has seen." I immediately awoke in a drunken stupor. Much to my surprise, I had shat myself to the point of oblivion. Needless to say, I will never inquire the spirits of a mythological Norwegian dragon within a dream of an outhouse Ouija board outing ever again. Looking back on the event, I can't help but wonder if my seemingly irrelevant experience had somehow caused the Dalsenget fire of Trondheim Sporve. I guess one can never know. My buddy Roger had a basement. At the foot of the basement stairs was a door. This door closed off the basement/pool and darts room from the rest of the house. The only problem is after so many years the door swelled up and would no longer close. Trying to close the door was a task. It had swelled so much that the flooring had been gouged out, from the door scraping so hard. Now for the story. Roger, myself and 2 other friends are playing around with the board in the dark. After about 15 minutes of goofing off, Roger's mother calls him up for dinner. He doesn't go. More shenanigans ensue for maybe 5 to 10 more minutes. Roger's mother gets heated. We can now hear her stomping across the house above us. She gets to the stairwell and screams, "Roger, get your ass up here for dinner right now." Roger responds, Okay, give me 2 more minutes." Mother responds, "Don't just stand there at the foot of the stairs, get up here." Now here's the problem. We are roughly 15 to 20 feet from the door. There's no way she sees Roger. Roger exclaims. We are sitting at the bar, and the moment the word bar leaves Roger's mouth, the door that nobody could close slams shut with a purpose. The 4 of us immediately went from joking around to screaming in panic, as we couldn't open the door. Roger's dad jumped in through the basement window and had to kick the door through to open it. I never went back to Roger's house. I grew up in an airly rural part of Alaska. One of my close friends lived out a ways and, because her mother was a bartender and bars didn't close until like 4 a.m., was alone a lot. Her trailer was absolutely shitty, the foundation had sunk, the pipes froze up and didn't work, and the heater couldn't keep up with an Alaskan winter, the windows always iced over on the inside. We were maybe 14, and one of Nikki's boyfriends brought over the Ouija board, and dared us all to use it. Most of our friends were too cool to admit they were scared, but I was a mega chicken. I never even did Bloody Mary, I was too afraid. They all settled in to play with the board. I went to the little back room where their rabbits, they raised them for fur and meat, lived to read a book. It wasn't exactly warm, but it wasn't cold, either, and Nikki's sister also came, so it was just the 2 of us and the bunnies. Every now and again we'd hear a shriek from the living room, but for the most part, nobody bothered us, so we were fine. At least, until Nikki came out to see us with the Ouija board. She pulled out one of the smaller rabbits and, while laughing hysterically, put it on the board. It sat still for a few seconds, and then it rolled over and, it just died. Bunnies do that, get so scared their heart explodes, but the timing was seriously horrific. I called my mom back and told her I'd walk home if she didn't come get me, even with the awful roads and late night and moose, and I left. I didn't go back for months. Nikki swore up and down, and even to this day, that she didn't think it would work, that they'd ask the spirit to show them how strong it was by killing something, but insists that's exactly what happened, too. It was only after summer set in and the sun was out all the time that I went back at all, and I never went back in winter. It's still a super creepy place. Over 10 years ago I was in a bad place mentally. I am a firm believer in the occult and believe in a higher power, ghosts and the supernatural. At the time I had collected a few Ouija boards and was really into trying to speak to the dead. After several months of feeling like I was a medium, I was starting to feel off. I was having horrendous thoughts that were very out of character for me. Thoughts of suicide, murder and torture, to name some of the tamer imaginings I was having. It got so bad that my hands were bleeding because I could not stop washing them. The guilt I felt from these thoughts was taking me over and I thought I was going insane. It was around this point that I knew I needed to have a conversation with my mom about what was happening. So I told her everything and she told me I needed to see a doctor. I began researching OCD and the effects of it. A week or so after confiding in my mom, I went and saw our family doctor. At 16 I was terrified of the idea of being mentally ill. I nervously told the doctor everything that I had been feeling, and he fills out a prescription for Prozac and recommends I see a shrink. I take the papers he gives me and shrug home. I tell my mom what he said and start to plan my road to recovery. A few days later, while researching some stuff about Ouija boards, trying to take my mind off of things, I come across an article about something called demonic oppression. Holy duck. This was me. This was the definition of that was happening to me. My symptoms were all on par with what the article was referencing. Basically, it is the idea of not being possessed and having a demon in you, but the idea of one being around you trying to bring you down as much as possible. It can lead to demonic possession. The number one route cause believed to entice a negative energy to harass you? Playing with Ouija boards. I then began researching how to be rid of this hypothetical oppression. Get rid of you boards and make sure to dispose of them correctly. I began to do so. Breaking the board and separating the pieces, making sure the pieces never touch when disposed of, and to separate the planchettes as well. I put it all in separate bags and it sat in our garbage for a day or two. Garbage day rolls around and I hear the truck outside around the corner making its stops. Shit. I forgot I had kitty litter stuff to throw out, so I run downstairs and head to the front door. My dad stops me at the bottom of the stairs and proceeds to mock me for having to clean up cat shit. I ignore him, not making eye contact, as he was annoying me and full on laughing at me at this point. I dart past and throw the shit into our bin to see the Ouija board bags being put into the garbage truck. When I enter the house, it's quiet. I yell to my dad and no one answers. 15 seconds go by and my mom comes in from work. She says hi and I ask where dad went. She tells me he hasn't been home yet from work and that he had to pick something up from the grocery store. I tell her he must have forgot to stop on the way home because I just spoke to him in person like 2 minutes ago. She said that's impossible because she was just talking to him on the phone. I run to a phone and call him. Sure enough, he's still at the A&P and he totally confused with what I am talking about. I hang up in complete shock. No one else was home and it 100% looked and sounded like my dad. I know that was the last hooray for the thing that so much enjoyed making me feel like the devil's toilet paper. After the boards were taken away, all my symptoms stopped. Like overnight stopped. I am scared to think of what I might have seen had I looked my father in the eyes that day. I was 18 when my friends and I used one. I didn't think it was real at first, but then we started asking it questions that only one person would know and it was correct every time. The spirit we were talking to was an angel, forgot the name, but he was a protector over our friend. My friend had told us about times when she would wake up with scratches and bruises sometimes and that she thought her house was haunted. We talked to this angel for nearly an hour, asking it many different questions because we were all still skeptical, but every answer was either correct or he didn't know. We asked him what year the house was built and he gave the correct answer. We called our friend's dad and he said it was correct. We were all kind of amazed and kind of scared at the same time. Because it's impossible to prove if it was real or if one of my friends was controlling it. My real name is Jonathan and none of my friends knew that. I asked what the first letter of my first name was to see if one of my friends would move it to D, but it went to J, and that was the creepiest part for me, other than him explaining how he protects our friend. I haven't used one since, but it's only been a couple of years. I wouldn't be opposed to doing it again. I grew up always being told to never mess with a Ouija board, so of course I was always very curious about them. When I was in high school, a friend of mine asked if I wanted to try hers with her. This friend lived on an old farm and we set up the board in the basement of her 100-year-old house. We started asking questions and a boy started talking to us. At first, we were asking silly questions, and he was answering in a similar fashion. He told us that he had died on the farm generations ago while working as a farm hand, something that was very possible. After talking for a while, we ended this session and went about our day. A few days later, we tried the board again. This time, the boy didn't seem to want to talk to my friend, only me. We thought this was strange, but kept asking our silly questions. The boy started getting mad at us. Up until this point, I was still pretty skeptical. I really thought that my friend was manipulating the whole thing to give me a good experience. As this boy was getting mad, her radio suddenly turned on in her room, and it was complete static, even though it was on a radio station that normally comes in clearly in her room. Then the smoke from the candle we had lit started rising up pretty far. We flipped out, put away the board, and never touched it again. I was convinced for weeks that I was going to be haunted by the boy. I had regular communication with a PD who lived in the attic at my ex-GF's house. He was friendly and well-meaning at first, but then he kept asking us to do sexual things near the attic. I'm not sure how much of it was real and how much of it was her messing with me, but she was visibly shaken. After that, strange things started happening. We were in her room and the door was loose, so light pressure could make the door rock back and forth slightly while closed, We hear the rocking vigorously and a large shadow underneath the door while home alone. The shaking stopped and the shadow vanished. Another time was with the light in her room. If the chain to turn it off and keep the fan on was broken, so to keep the light off and the fan on we would unscrew the bulb just enough to keep it in the socket but stay off. Meaning that if you were to push it, the light would come on while held in place. The night in question we had unscrewed it and suddenly the light was flashing as if something were repeatedly tapping it. It still kind of freaks me out. We looked up what to do and found a way to supposedly safely destroy it, by cutting the board into 7 pieces and getting rid of it. We also broke the viewfinder. Nothing else happened. I had a friend a few years back who was Wiccan. He and I messed around with a Ouija board a good bit for several months. We were roommates at the time. I still don't know if it was all in our heads or if we really reached beings, things, not of this world. Now, I do believe there are other planes of existence. This is based off of past experience, including, but not limited to the Ouija board. Well, he showed me how to use it and explained there was a woman he spoke to often using the Ouija. I forget her name, but she gave us advice, answered questions, when she felt like it. She was benevolent, but sometimes apathetic. Let's call her Helen. She apparently died in the early to mid-20th century. She never told us any more about her life. We would try to talk to anything that would contact us. We made contact with a spirit in my friend's cousin's basement. This was a pre-World War II era house. The spirit claimed to be a boy the age of 12. He said he died in the house and was in the basement with us. He asked us to open this door down there that was welded shut. We told him we couldn't since we didn't have a cutting torch and it was a rental property. Not ours. He became increasingly angry with us. He said things that made us think he was not who he said he was. He threatened us. We never tried contacting him again. Helen later told us that he was no boy. I'm getting goosebumps just typing this. She said he was dangerous and that he had tried to cross over into our plane several times before. After that, the cousin, who lived in that house, told us that things would come up missing and sometimes turn up in odd places. Like their cupcake pan ended up behind the couch and things of that nature. We also tried the Ouija in a graveyard. There were 5 or 6 spirits trying to talk to us at once. We all concentrated with our fingers on the oracle until there was coherence in the messages. We talked to a young woman. She seemed nice enough. We just asked about her life and what it was like where she was. Then we lost her and we all felt something bad. Ominous. The next message we received was, "You ducked up." We didn't wait around or keep trying to make contact. We hauled ass out of there. I don't speak to anyone from that period of my life anymore, but I will not let anyone bring a Ouija into my house. It's not worth it. These spirits, demons, can cross over and I want no part of that. Summer of 1989, how my father lost his brother. Holidays had just begun, my father, his bro and his 2 mates all around 19/20ths of a years old. They're round their local shop debating on getting a bottle of vodka or a few beers. One mate spots a new item behind the counter, new because they're always returned, destroyed, thrown away. They split the money and bought a crate of beers and this weird board. Upon inspection, my dad was the first to recognize what it was as he heard stories, but not enough to warn him of the dangers. It was my uncle's idea that they go the graveyard on the highest hill in town in order to experiment, and get drunk in peace. I think my dad knew this was a bad idea from the start, as he still hasn't forgive himself for making the wrong choice all those years ago. They entered the land of dead, clearly unwelcomed, as my father said. Even the birds and rats proceeded to scatter and flee. And so they begun, their harmless night of drinking, jokes, scary stories, etc. It was at the climax my uncle decided to open up the box, clearly intoxicated. The mood changed completely. My father's words from here: "It's like all wind, time, sense of atmosphere / ambience literally paused in the presence of this weird board game." And so they begun, completely serious now, and began asking normal questions at first, like "Where are we?" Nothing happened. More questions: "What day is it again?" Nothing. Upon getting pissed off, they began asking eagerly, "What should we do?" Looking for fun, clearly, and so the board began. Death, it spelled out. Everyone looked at each other with smirks, thinking it's a joke, but the thing is, my father was Muslim, so he believed in being able to contact the devil and just sat silently. Then they asked, "Who are you again?" Death was the answer. My uncle completely disregarded all spirituality and began mocking the board, its power, its control. He was getting pissed off at the fact that an object could tell him what to do. My father says he began muttering to himself, unaware when his mates mentioned it, saying they're just drunk. After a few weeks, he was completely different. Uncle started taking drugs, weed, coke, LSD, acting aggressive towards small acts, leaving a door slightly ajar, lights not going green quick enough, when he couldn't access drugs on time, etc. When my father attempted to get him off this stuff, he went even worse. Locked himself in a room, harmed himself constantly, would be shouting in his sleep crying for help, but he never knew what happened during sleep. It got worse when he began to sleepwalk, walking the streets completely naked, shouting at strangers, banging on windows, breaking car windows. On the day before he took his life, he was locked in his room for 3 days, wouldn't answer to anyone, loud banging what he heard often and screams of pain and help. 3 hours prior to discovery, there was loud screeching like he was carving something into the walls. When my father entered, he was completely horrified. Horrified isn't the word to describe this, and there are no words. Arabic writing in blood was smeared on the walls, his whole body completely covered in feces, piss, blood, I think even cracked bones. He was unrecognizable due to how much the self-harm began to get. It's like he just bashed his face nonstop begging for death. My father never touched one of those boards again, turned completely to faith, Islam, and remembers his brother every year and the horrors he witnessed. He promises to never let his family be led astray ever again. Moral: a Ouija board will only work if deep down you actually believe. If you mock such powers, they will fight back with force, fear and despair. You take what you give. What goes around comes around. He clearly disrespected a place of rest, where the dead need to sleep and await their time, and so the devil showed him what true death is. I don't know what it is about Ouija boards that makes them work, but I have non-superstitious friends that will never touch them again. My first experience came when I was 21 years old. The entire night, we'd been getting mixed responses from different evil spirits with names like Burza or Kazas. There were tons of accurate hits from each evil spirit and an equal amount of inaccurate ones. They'd tell us something that was true but put an incorrect date on it or spell a name wrong. It wasn't until one of the spirits claimed to know me that shit got weird. Many years ago, I watched my friend beat his family dog to near death and poison it with antidepressants. I was too scared of him to stop him and let him kill the poor animal. Fast forward to a couple years later and something on the Ouija board targets me, claiming I had killed it. At first I was asking its age and when it died, then I asked if it was human, it said no. That was when I noticed that my friends all had their eyes closed, so I took my hand off the eye and asked what the spirit's name was. It spelled the dog's name that my shitty friend had killed and was proof enough, to me at least, that Ouija boards were real. My friends still don't believe I took my hand off the eye, and none of them knew about the story until that happened. In my experience, Ouija boards are real and they work. My grandmother recently moved from her old house in the middle of nowhere to our neighborhood so my parents could keep a closer eye on her. While cleaning out her garage/basement, me and my brothers found an old Ouija board. My mom told us to throw it out, to burn it, but being teenagers we wanted to keep it and mess around with it. We brought it back to our place and I guess it just moved from room to room for a while when we would look at it. We never really used it until one night me and one of my best friends from high school got curious. We decided to look up how to actually use it online. While playing it I thought I would freak out my friend and move my hand to spell out things I thought would be true. We would ask it stuff like where am I going to college and shit. My friend freaked out and thought it was real, but I knew better. My mom was home and he was explaining to her what happened. She advised us to actually use it and ask the board something neither of us knew. She told us to ask it what her grandmother's maiden name was. I had absolutely no idea, and I'm fairly certain my friend didn't either. So we went back to the room and started dicking around with it again. We asked it the question and then I don't know what happened. If I subconsciously knew what the answer was or something else happened, but it spelled out a peculiar name. I think it was something like Muraina. Anyways, after we it spelled out the name, I went to ask my mom if that's what the name was and she said yes. There was no way my friend knew or she told him because he was with me the entire time and I didn't know as well, but that was the name. My mom told us to get rid of it after that and what happened when she was a teenager using it. Apparently she was at a party with a few other girls when she was in high school and they had asked it who would be the first person in their class to die. After a few weeks she said there was a kid who got in a horrible car accident and died at the hospital and his name is the one the board spelled. I used a Ouija board around Halloween of 2011. It was my second time using it, and only my first time using it with another person. During the process, we frequently gave examples of each of us controlling the planchette. Like, I'd spell out ham sandwich and be like yo that was me controlling things and my ex would be like I know. We lived just outside of DC at the time, in a pretty historical part of Virginia. Lots of old shit. We only used the Ouija board once together, and during that time we went through a lot. Most notably, a kid showed off how well he or she could count. We'd ask him/her questions, and all he or she would respond with was 1 to 10. We asked how old they were. 4. We asked if they could read/write. No. We asked if they could count. Yes. 1 to 10. After that, whoever we were talking to knew about his mom. She died about 2 years before he and I met. I knew nothing about her. She answered questions that later had to be confirmed by my ex's dad. Even my ex didn't know if the answer was true or not. It was. It was awful and scary, and he cried a lot. Ouija boards scare me now. When I was 14 or 15, my best friend and I got a Ouija board. We immediately started talking to a spirit who introduced herself as Mama. Mama answered all of our silly questions for a while. Nadia had a crush on Zach, future honeymoon would be to Hawaii, all the normal teenage girl questions. After a while, I guess Mama got bored and called us witch. Which was really profoundly upsetting because we were Mormons at the time. She then started figure-8ing like crazy. We put her away. After that, whenever we pulled out the old Ouija board, we would start out speaking with some random spirit, and it would be very mundane, until Mama would butt in by going Mama, figure-8ing, quickly going from the sun to the moon, and calling us all sorts of colorful words. This had been happening for ages, and we decided to do something about it. We read online about exorcising evil spirits from Ouija boards. It called for all sorts of things, including juniper candles. We settled for Bath and Body Works fruity something or other, as it was what we had on hand. We also collected a few Bibles and Book of Mormons, and a framed picture of the Mormon prophet at the time for good measure. We set everything up, with the board propped a few inches above the ground over a Bible, fruity candles twinkling, Prophet Gordon B. Hinckley watching on solemnly. We started by reading some silly incantation that I'm 100% sure looking back was just silly mumbo jumbo and not anything of worth. Our setup, while honestly quite useless against an irritable demon, proved at least annoying. Mama was pissed from the get-go. She started with a furiously quick Mama. That almost threw the planchette off the board. Then she started cursing, upping the ante with ducks and dunce, which up until this point hadn't been used. She started spiraling the planchette in wild circles, as if she were trying to dig her way out. Looking back, everything so far would be something I could attribute to two silly teens, impressionable and scared and letting themselves be caught up in the moment. But then the light bulb exploded. I have no explanation for why that board was peppered with glass at the exact moment the planchette stopped its fervent dance. Maybe it was faulty wiring. An electrical surge. I haven't touched a Ouija board since. Had a bunch of us when we were younger that were very into spiritual stuff, witchcraft, and the like. My one friend's apartment was a place we could go to study, be out of the broom closet, hang with like-minded people, and practice AP-ing, astral project. So his wife at the time, who was as close to me as my own sister and a very strong psychic, we had decided to break out the Ouija board they had and start working with it. Well, that ducker worked and worked well. We didn't wind up getting any demons or the board boiling or spelling out Hail Satan or any of that shit, but we were definitely communicating with something. Now, you might think this is all bullshit/whatever, right? Normally I'd be inclined to agree except for this. It was only the two of us doing it. For some reason we worked really well together on stuff, and we weren't physically touching the planchette. In order to keep it fair and unbiased and no accusations of cheating, we'd hover one fingertip above at about an inch/inch and a half. And before you say magnets, we'd do this on the floor of the living room. This wasn't the last time we played with it. We never got anything stereotypical or whatever, mostly because we were ducking smart to ward off the place first before inviting stuff in, from it like Satan or anything, but some real for sure creepy shit happened from playing with that. You may believe this or not, but everything I'm gonna type out here is 100% truth. Me and my friends were curious about the Ouija board just over a decade ago. I went to her house when I was 17, 29 now, for a Halloween party. We were too drunk, so we decided to organize another day and gather most of the same people but to do an Ouija board and seances etc., but sober and with an open mind. There were a lot of us there and we took it in turns so that there wasn't a group of us using it at once. At one point I thought I was talking to a family member until things felt different, someone with a particular hatred towards me specifically. It spelt out the name Baal. I had never heard of this name before. I searched it later on and discovered it was the name of a demon. Now, despite everyone there being in a Catholic school our whole lives, I can say with certainty that no one gave a shit about religion at all. Nobody knew the name of demons. After a girl there began to feel sick and became extremely drowsy, we agreed to call it off and put the whole thing down to a crazy experience but nothing more. It didn't stop the itch for me to keep going. This is the background context of how it started and lead to what's to come below. After this, me and two of my closest friends at the time used the board on a regular basis. We used it to communicate with spirit guides and other random supposed spirits. We also spoke to demons, lots. Baal was a frequent interrupter of this. However, my spirit guides told me I had a gift of exorcising bad spirits and demons. This is why Baal hated me. That I was some force in some spiritual war to come when I die, and Baal's intention was for me to commit suicide instead, all demons' intentions. Yes, I know this sounds like I've relayed some crazy plot, but hear me out. This is why we used it so frequently. I felt like I had a purpose in doing it. Of all the board sessions I've had, speaking to all manner of spirits, one time, in particular, scared me like no other. One of my friends increasingly became sensitive to the emotions of other spirits. We agreed to do a session. It seemed someone needed our help, and amongst exorcising, we also aided spirits to move on. We spoke to a girl, angry and in pain. This turned out to be not exactly a spirit, and it caught me off guard. I heard in my right ear a loud, piercing scream. I jumped, trying to not take my finger off the board. I said to my friend that this isn't friendly. I heard another scream, distant but loud, and a sharp pain shot through my head, the type of feeling you have when you have a brain freeze. I used to feel this when speaking to or being around demons. We tried our best to get rid of her, but we couldn't, and eventually just stopped. I have never felt or audibly heard anything that violent in my life. Ouija board is a Hasbro game, but talking boards have been around for a long time, and tools to contact the dead have existed for as long as humans have had a conception of death. 99.99% of the time you're just going to end up spooking each other a little bit. Even people who have experience as mediums and psychics strike out. But here's the thing, evil shit is out there. Even if you 100% have no belief as spirits, or demons, or angels, or any of that, everyone has felt that human instinct of being afraid of the dark. Sure, it's a leftover prey instinct, and it mostly doesn't mean anything. Except sometimes it does. Go ahead, play with a Ouija board and duck around on it, but the second you start to feel like it's getting real, or there's something that feels off, trust that. Why bother messing around with something you don't even believe in, much less understand? If things get away from you, how are you going to control the situation? You can't. So don't duck around on it. So not my experience, but I was involved. I was a senior in a boarding school high school and served as an RA at the dorms. Seniors/juniors got the first floor of the dorm, while the freshmen/sophomore were the second floor. Since it was high school, we had this annoying curfew at 10 p.m. where our electricity would be cut off, everything save for the light/heater would be cut off. Now it's 11 p.m. and somehow the girls' room above my room still had power and their radio is going full ham. I'm irritated, but it's the weekend, so NBD, right? Then I hear shouts and screaming, so now I have to go up there. Being an RA, I have one master key to all the doors, but as I'm trying to unlock the door, it's not working. The screaming is intensifying in sound and terror, and now I've got the door unlocked, but it won't open. All the doors were built to swing inwards. I'm throwing my body weight into the door, but it's not budging. I felt like something is just awful, a sickening feeling in my stomach. Fifth time is the charm, and my shoulder is in pain by the time the door flew inwards, and I see 5 girls huddled in the corner, tears running, in their room is a damn mess. In the middle of the floor is a homemade Ouija board. It's freezing in the room despite being September, and the room had no AC. The girls either rushed past me or flung themselves onto me and were just a mess. Clearly whatever they called wasn't too happy. I should also mention that I went to a private Native American boarding school that was opened in the 1850s, and there have been many reports of spirits on campus. These girls managed to piss off one that was living in the dorms. When my mom was a teenager, she invited all of her friends over for a sleepover. One of those friends brought an Ouija board with them. My mom says at first no one took it seriously, but then the board started to bounce between the letters Z and O when they asked its name. It started going around in circles on the board after a bit, and then just stopped. The house was never the same after that. It was little things at first, doors opening and closing, lights turning on and off, the dog acting strange. But then it escalated to the point people in the house were getting scratched and growled at, and people would see very solid and obvious shadows and orbs. Often my mom would be home alone and hear full-blown yet muffled conversations happening in the empty room next to her. Sometimes her name would be called. Sometimes the old landline phone would ring and ring until my mom gained the courage to lift it and hang it back up. That specific landline was broken and had been unplugged for years. This happened to anyone who stayed alone in that house for more than a couple hours. My mom said the house had a really cold, empty feeling. It always felt dark and hollow like a cave. No one could ever shake the feeling of being stared at or followed. But all of the feelings would leave as soon as they left the house. My grandparents moved out of that house when I was 8, but before they did, I vividly remember running to sleep between my grandparents in their room almost every night because I'd hear and see things. I'd wake up to see dark shadows and blobs standing/floating at the edge of my bed, orbs darting in random directions, or I'd be kept awake by heavy and fast footsteps running up and down the stairs. It wouldn't stop until I got up and looked, but after a while, it would start up again. No one would ever be there. To this day, that house is still messed up, even though multiple pastors have come in and blessed the house. The activity wasn't violent anymore after the house was blessed a second time, but it was still there. The house has seen 6 different owners in the last 9 years or so since my grandparents sold it. No one in my family has bothered to go up and ask the current homeowners what they experienced, but the fact that that house has seen 6 owners in 9 years in my city, which has a huge real estate bubble going on right now, and has been like this for the last 5 years or so, is impressive. Something from the Ouija board is still attached to my mom. It's a rather weak attachment, but we move quite often, and stuff will happen unless we bless the new house. It's usually minor stuff, but it's stuff beyond new house noises, but if it's provoked and fed, it gets worse. For instance, in one house, my mom was going through some hard financial stuff. I was hanging out with my grandma for the day, and mom called her hysterical. We had a crockpot on a shelf high above the kitchen and directly above the oven. My mom was working on her laptop at the kitchen table when she looked up and noticed the lid of the crockpot was hovering a few inches above it. The lid was suddenly flung at her, but halfway in the air, it took a sharp 180-degree turn and smashed directly into the face of the oven, shattering both the glass door and the back oven light. My grandma went back to my house with me, and she tried to figure out an explanation to the situation, and tried to convince my mom it was just a freak accident. The problem is, however, is that the crockpot was on a solid shelf, and when checked, it was found that the shelf lightly leaned back towards the wall, but not towards the kitchen. For the crockpot lid to end up where it did, it would have had to fight gravity. It was a lid that had sealing rubber around it which made it sort of stick to the pot itself, so it wouldn't move while soup was being cooked, and somehow gain enough speed and direction in a 7-foot fall to fly like a boomerang into the face of the oven. It takes a lot to break oven glass. And the lid still had enough force to end up all the way in the back of the oven to shatter the back oven light. My mom had multiple people come in to help with the cleanup and installation of a new oven. No one could come up with a logical explanation. It costed her an extra $500 or so to replace the oven. In another house, the cupboards never stopped slamming in the middle of the night, until mom got up to yell at whatever was doing it. She got the house blessed, and we never had issues with the cupboards again. Now we immediately bless each house we move into so stuff doesn't happen. I guess this is just a warning not to screw around with Ouija boards no matter how innocent they seem. They're not innocent, and they're not fake. If you get in contact with the wrong thing, it will mess your life up, and probably the lives of others.